Hello and welcome to today's webinar on whether COVID-19 has changed the sector's priorities when it comes to digital transformation. Today's event, sponsored by Integra Associates and Unit 4, is focused very firmly on the learning that all organisations have been through over the last year. We'll be examining the lessons and the knowledge the housing sector should be guided by as a result of the experience when it comes to creating digital systems for the future. And at the moment, I don't think there's a day that goes by where I'm not having a conversation that isn't about a social landlord looking to transform the way it operates or embed changes that have been made over the last year. Very, very live conversation, very active conversation in most organisations in the sector right now. Obviously, the pandemic has forced digital transformation projects to move at a rapid pace, affecting everything from where staff work to making sure vital services such as repairs and rent payments work effectively for residents. But what are the important changes we should be making now? Is there a danger that some organisations are learning the wrong lessons and making unfortunate decisions as a result? We've got a fantastic panel lined up today to discuss all of this and much more. They'll be talking us through the approaches they've taken, the change and innovation they've implemented, and the lessons they've learned as a result. And they'll also be talking us through how that should impact on the priorities for digital transformation for the rest of the sector and indeed their own organisations moving forwards. So huge amounts to get through. And again, absolutely crucial, huge conversations for the sector to be having right now. And to do that, as I mentioned, we've got a brilliant panel lined up for us, and we'll be hearing from Kevin Heslop, Chief Operating Officer with Sanctuary, Anita Khan, Executive Director, Customer Services with Settle, Mark Bloomer, Managing Director with Integra, as mentioned, and Charlotte Murray, Coordinator of Health and Wellbeing at South Yorkshire Housing Association. Welcome all, and we'll be hearing from everybody in a few moments' time. But before we kind of kick things off, just a reminder to you tuning in today, thank you very much for doing so. This is all about learning for you and what's most useful for you in your own organisations and for your own jobs. So please do use the question and answer box attached to ask as many questions as possible during the presentations, and I'll pick up on as many as we can get through after those presentations have finished. So absolutely your opportunity to ask the questions that are most pressing for you and to help inform your own decision making moving forward. So please do use that Q&A box, yeah, we'll get through a decent chunk of questions after the presentations. Which brings me very nicely to our first presentation this morning. Kevin, welcome. The floor is yours. Please kick things off in style.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. Morning, everybody. In fact, early afternoon, isn't it? Yeah, Kevin Heslop. I'm the Group Director of Technology at Sanctuary. So I'm going to talk about the pandemic and what it's meant for Sanctuary and how it's altered our thoughts about our technology strategy and priorities. First of all, just a bit of Sanctuary at a glance. I'm not going to dwell on this for a long time, but I don't assume that everyone knows everything about Sanctuary. So we're a large organisation in this sector. We provide housing, we provide a large number of support schemes, run 10,000 rooms of student accommodation. And the pandemic's impacted us in different ways in different operations, as you can imagine, with some extreme examples to do with care homes and student accommodation, as you'll have seen for yourselves in the press over this last year. So that's who we are, that's what we do, that's our scale of what we do. And then there's how we do it. So our mission is to build affordable homes and sustainable communities where people choose to live. The impact of the pandemic put some threats across that, if we're honest, and then it did for everyone in the sector. Our values are really important, and from a technology point of view, my job's to understand these from a technology point of view. So things like diversity value, the value of diversity around EDI and making sure systems are accessible for all, the ambition value that our company has. That's very much around that we want to invest in technology. We see it as part of our strategy, but we want to push the agenda. But integrity is about doing the right thing and realising you can't do it all and making those tough choices and having quality outcomes. And the sustainability point is around just making sure what we do is fit for the future, scalable, and sees us forwards for the long term. So that's very much in our mind, and it still has been in our mind during the pandemic. We haven't tried to throw the values out of the window at this time. So where did we find ourselves before the pandemic hit us? Where were we? Sort of February last year. So we'd had heavy investment in our core systems. That's been something that Sanctuary's done a lot of. We'd invested in ERP and all of our core systems. That gave us data confidence, standardized processes, standardized ways of working where possible. We were starting to create more mobility in the operating model. So we'd gone from core systems into mobile systems and apps for frontline workers. So some of that was in place. We were progressing well with the Microsoft platform and rollout of Windows 10 devices, Microsoft 365. Parts of Sanctuary were already using Teams, but not all of it. So we still had one foot firmly in the legacy camp. We weren't completely in that new world. But that actually interestingly left us well placed for the challenges ahead, because we were able to use some of the old techniques to help us out, like giving people the Citrix portal to log on to continue doing their work, as well as people who had a brand new Windows 10 laptop and Microsoft 365. And interestingly, splitting the work in that way allowed us to not have problems with network bandwidth that we might have had when we sent everybody home. So I would call that some good planning and some good fortune as well at the same time. So now into the pandemic. My thoughts on the housing side of things are, at Sanctuary, we think that our customer expectations have changed even more. There's an ever-increasing demand for digital platforms, customer self-service, and for business to be done online, more so than it was before. So I'll give you an example. More people have been getting the shopping delivered by shopping online than ever before. More people have been doing the shopping on Amazon and other providers to get things delivered because they've had to do that. And I think people are making those adjustments, and there's permanent expectation changes that come with them. We were already building on a model to change the way that we addressed our customers. So we were opening up more community hubs and more drop-in places and having a more mobile frontline workforce. So we've been piloting that, and our pilots have told us that we need to do more of that. So we've continued those pilots during the pandemic, and they've helped us through the moments. We now need to push more of that development of apps for our mobile workers, because those development of apps is going to make our mobile workers be able to work within that community hub and drop-in model. And on the back of this, we already had some okay, basic, if you like, customer self-service tools on our websites, but we now need to push that further. So during the pandemic, we've recruited a new head of brand and digital and a director of customer experience and engagement to help us push that conversation even further around our customer channels. What I'm really proud of is during the pandemic period, we've also launched and designed a residence app in collaboration with our National Resident Scrutiny Panel. And the whole collaboration of what that app does is being done in the virtual world. So we've now engaged with our residents panel in the virtual world across teams and designed with them a residence app. And that's going to be something that we progress further as well. So that's a story in housing. The story in care is something quite different, actually. So in care, we'd already made some key investments, and we're really glad that we did. In fact, they've proved to be essential. So we've developed in-house a tool called Cradle, which is to make all of our care planning electronic, whereas quite traditionally in the care home sector, there's lots of pen and paper. But all those patient records and resident records were electronic. And having that view centrally around where our problems lie and what we need to do was absolutely gold dust at the time the pandemic hit and affected how we work. We implemented a new system called Radar to do all of our incident response stuff. Now, everything to do with COVID cases and cases affecting members of staff who couldn't attend their shifts and who needed to isolate and shield themselves, or an infection in a care home, all of that went in Radar. And we had all of that central control and visibility of the data that came with that. And on the back of that, we were able to design lots of new analytics that gave us that dynamic view of the world that was really important. So these are investments we'd already made that we just built on top of a little bit to help us respond. And we already had, because of those technologies, we already had the connectivity and devices in the care homes that we could also do virtual visits. So at a time that when loved ones couldn't see their family member or friend in a care home because the visits were restricted, we could offer virtual visits, which doesn't replace the real thing, doesn't replace a hug, but it was something that we could offer the customers and their friends and family that wouldn't have otherwise been there. So we're really glad about those investments we made in care. They actually proved essential, not designed for a pandemic, but were really important when the pandemic came. Like all companies, I guess the pandemic's also changed how we do work. So we've gone from, on average, having 50 people work from home a day onto having 1,400 people a day working from home. And then we've invested on top of that Microsoft 365 stuff to then further prove that case for working from home. We're now planning out for a flexible and hybrid way of working in the future, where the home and office both play a part around how Sanctuary works. But how we work is altering, so we will make that bigger push on customer channels to meet the demand and expectations. Building safety is hugely prominent. So as well as adjusting around the pandemic, we can't adjust away from things that we need to get on with. So our building safety program is the other big thing next to these things I'm talking about today. And we have to make tough choices about things that have to come later. Like I said earlier, integrity is not being able to do everything. So if we have building safety to do, we want to alter our operating model around hybrid working. We want to push on our customer channels. There's also some technology choices that have to be made to wait. In among all this, the boardroom and the exec committee rooms where we make these decisions have all been virtual. So we've now got this concept of the virtual boardroom, which is a new feature which we're really enjoying. So the summary piece, so I can finish somewhere near on time, Martin, is saying the reflections on the pandemic for Sanctuary is we were well placed. The things we were already doing held us well. The Sanctuary teams together, technology and all the teams around the operations are pulled together like never before. We've got a great dynamic between technology and the business now. We're accelerating some changes we're already making. Those housing changes are the accelerating ones. We want to meet what we think are permanently changed customer expectations around digital offerings. We're fitter and stronger to face the future based on the learning from this period of time. But I can't do a presentation about this period without talking about cybersecurity just briefly. The cyber threat seems to be raised compared to usual. We've seen more cyber incidents, even within the sectors that we work in, more cyber incidents, an increase in cyber crime. And also, my whole presentation's been about increasing the technology offer. So while we increase the technology offer at a time that cybercrime's on the increase, security more prominent than ever. And that's my whistle-stop tour of Sanctuary in the pandemic.
Thank you very much. Huge amounts to pick up on there, and fab presentation. Lots to think about, and we have got questions coming in already. So it's certainly prompting questions straight away. And just a reminder, please do use that Q&A box. Get your questions coming in, and we'll make sure we ask as many that will prove useful to you back at your places of work moving forward. So thank you very much, Kevin. Anita, you're up next. Welcome, and the floor is yours. Please take it away. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. Hi, everybody. So I'm from Settle. As Martin said, for those of you who are not familiar with us, we're based in North Hertfordshire. We have just under 10,000 homes. And I just wanted to start with our purpose, which for a lot of organisations during the pandemic really felt like it came to life. It was something that seemed to resonate really strongly with our colleagues and really strongly with our customers. So we exist to help people find a place to live and to help our customers stay comfortably in their home. And the bit around customers being comfortable is the bit that we often find our colleagues quoting back to us. We need to do this to make our customers comfortable. And that felt like a big part of our response during COVID. So the question, has it changed our priorities around digital transformation? Yes, obviously. So a bit like it's already been talked about today, like I'm sure a lot of the organisations and colleagues who are listening, we had to move to delivering our services remotely with the exception of repairs. And like a lot of organisations, we had roadmaps for Office 365 and automation roadmaps. And what we experienced was a real acceleration in innovation. Those things that we thought were going to take a really long time in terms of how colleagues worked, also how we deliver services to customers, felt like they happened really quickly. So we did all the standard stuff that I'm sure everybody did, moved to Office 365, moved to kind of everybody working remotely and continuing to deliver all services. And I think that's the big thing that we learned that is possible. For a long time, organisations have had roadmaps where we've gradually nudged or tested different ideas about working more flexibly, whether it be in the field or at home. And that kind of sudden, we have no choice, backs against the wall. What we learned is it's not something that is a theory we need to test. It absolutely is something that we can do. So for us, moving the services to work remotely happened within a couple of weeks, and that felt fairly straightforward. But our offering was as much about engagement during that time. So we do something called a big door knock on a quarterly basis, where everybody in the organisation, from the board, exec team, all colleagues in the business, go out and speak to customers. So we have it thematic based on whatever we feel is important to learn at that time. During the lockdown, we had to adjust it. So where it was possible with the restrictions, we still went out and door knocked, but a lot of it happened kind of over the phone. So over the course of the last 6 months, we had 20,000 outbound contacts checking in on customers, seeing how people are doing. In September, we managed to do a face-to-face door knock. And what we're learning from our perception surveys and from the door knock is that our customers really valued the engagement bit. So yes, they liked the fact that we made it easy for them to contact us, and they had online channels and they could do that stuff that worked really well. We had live chat, we had emails, we had our online portal the same way that I'm sure that lots of people do. But the thing that seemed to stand out in the feedback is the fact that we had engaged with our customers. So a few sort of quotes there from our customers in terms of the check-in, the fact that people really appreciated that we called them. So what we did is at the start, we sent out communication to every customer saying, do you need help during this time? What is it that we can help you with? And something like 17% of our customers had ongoing contact with us throughout the pandemic to combat social isolation, or whether it was they needed support with food, medication, whatever it was. And that became a really big part of our feature in terms of our offer for... So I can't move my slides. Sorry, it's caught up, sorry. And I mentioned that during that time we had perception surveys. So it's really come out in our perception surveys that our trust score amongst our customer base has really gone up during that time. And the thing that people have quoted to us is the fact that we continue to engage with them outside of delivering our core services. And I think in terms of how we look at going forward, we've talked about the digital bit. And in terms of digital platforms needing to be better, I think that's just the cost of business. So there was a point in time in our sector when we looked at our portals and apps, and we saw that as innovation. It's not innovation. It's the cost of doing business. As a service provider, we all have to have digital platforms that work. And we exist in an age of the everything customer. You know, all of us want everything all of the time, and our customers are no different to us. We are them and they are us. So as a customer, when something goes wrong, we contact an organisation. We expect that every person we speak to in that organisation should know what our problem is, and they should be fixing it. And our customers are no different to us. So whatever it is that we think that we're delivering on that is cutting edge and new, our customers will just accept it. So we might think it's a really big project that we've automated online appointments. Our customers will go on and they'll just accept that as status quo. They won't remember that they couldn't do that 2 weeks ago, because the pace of change and what we're experiencing elsewhere as consumers is that stuff just happens. So it might be a mammoth effort for us, but for the consumer, it's standard. And, you know, one of the things that we often do is we compare ourselves to other housing providers. Well, guess what? Our customers aren't using other housing providers. They're using all the other service providers that we are. So they're using Uber Eats, they're using Amazon, and their expectation is that what we will deliver is the same as that. As I said before, what we really heard from our customers is that they still value the engagement bit. So the challenge for us is investing in those digital platforms to make sure all of those transactional things happen in a really effortless way for our customers. So when they want something done quickly, we're able to service that really, really well. What that means for us as businesses is we're doing that stuff really efficiently. So that means that we can invest in our neighborhoods and we can do that engagement stuff, and that's stuff of real value, because we have to know there's lots for us to do. The impact of the pandemic, it isn't over. It's going to be here for years to come. And what we know as housing providers is quite often we're that go-to place within our neighbourhoods. Our relationship with our residents and our neighbourhoods is not transactional in the way that it is with other service providers. It's multi-layered, and they will look to us to bridge some of those gaps. And it's in our best interest to do that, because our relationships with individual customers and neighbourhoods, they're decades worth of investments. They're not short term. We're not in and out. We are there for the long run. So we know that where some of those gaps exist, that is going to be for us to come in. And I think the only way that we can achieve that is by investing in our digital platforms, driving efficiency there, and reinvesting in terms of those feet on the street and whatever those gaps turn out to be. the bit that's really going to drive that for us is, as organisations, as we become more data rich and we start to become more sophisticated in how we start to understand our neighbourhoods, what are the triggers that mean that resilience levels have shifted in neighbourhoods or individual residents, and how does our engagement then change with those residents? I think just going back to that everything custom bit, and that's all of those. The bit around engagement is, as much as the expectations have increased around digital platforms, we expect that if we have fewer face-to-face engagements, actually they're going to be a far higher quality too. So if I only ever really speak to you, my housing provider, when I really need something, guess what? I expect a 5-star service. I don't expect to ring somebody and then be passed on to somebody else and be passed on to somebody else. So that overall service expectation lifts. And if we do it in digital, but we don't do it face to face, that doesn't quite work. We have to make the service experience across the platforms feel like it's at a higher standard, because that's just the expectation. And as I said, our customers are not comparing us to other housing providers. They're comparing us to all the other service providers that they interact with all the time. Why should they experience anything less from us? And I think for us, this is a slide I always tend to share whenever I'm speaking. We've always been committed to this. We are committed to multi-channel. And I saw one of the questions pop up in the chat box. Somebody was talking about, what about those who are digitally excluded, and are we leaving people behind? As I said before, I think our relationship is multi-layered. So even those who are digitally included, they want different things at different times. We don't offer a single product or a single service to our customers, and our relationship with them is not a one-off product or one-off service. You know, the gift of having the life cycle of 20, 30 years with the customer is you have lots of opportunities to get it right, and you have lots of opportunities to gain their trust. And so for us, we're always committed to multi-channel. And I happen to think that it's not as linear as that. I don't think it's that somebody opts for digital and they want only digital all the time. It's, you might be digital by default, but other times you might want something different. And right now, Gardner talks about in the UK, 48% of service interactions start online, with a view that by 2024, that will be 80-something. And that's an interesting one for us to consider. Do we see it that there are particular contacts that our customers want online, but there are other contacts that they will always want to be done differently? And the obvious one for me is always around succession. So if a customer contacts us through our digital channel and says, you know, succession on a tenancy, that immediately tells us there's either been a relationship breakdown or bereavement. Is that not a trigger for us to say there's going to be a change of resilience in this household? There's going to be a change of income in terms of our binary relationship with the customer. So do we want that to be a digital transaction, or do we actually want it to be a face-to-face or an engagement piece, so that we can have early interventions and support customers where they might need it because they've got a change in circumstances? So the future for us, as I said, investment in digital offering, and as I said, I don't think that's innovative. I don't think that sets us apart. It's the cost of business. We're service providers. We just have to recognise that's something that we have to do. And in terms of our offering, we still have some manual interventions. We haven't quite automated everything, but even though that might be mammoth effort and investment for us, as I said, for our customers, there will almost be a shrug of, well, haven't you always done that? And that's not because they don't recognise the effort, but that's just because we're all consumers and we do that too. When I go on to Amazon, I don't think, oh, how wonderful, good old Amazon, good for them, they added that. I think, well, yeah, they should have that. That is how an app should work. And our customers will think the same. So I think there is something about us in the sector of looking at how others are doing it, not how other people in our sector are doing it, as I said, because I'm pretty sure our customers aren't going on and checking Sanctuary's app, or Sanctuaries aren't coming and checking Settle's app. They're using banks and Amazon and whoever else, and they expect us to be as good as them. The thing I said before about kind of acceleration of innovation, that sort of stuff around automating processes, and as I said before, we had kind of lots of business change arrangements and things that were going to take a really long time. That stuff just seems to be happening, and culturally that's something as a business we need to hold on to, so that just getting on with it and doing it and making a process easier, we need to make sure that we really embrace that culture and stick with it. The agility of working. So, I think the important bit to recognise is we're all still recalibrating, us as businesses and our customers. So whatever the changing world is, we're not even the other end of all of the lockdown restrictions. We're still somewhere in that. So we're all figuring out what is it that we like in terms of work, life, how we consume services and products. And I think there's probably some wisdom in not committing to what our workplace looks like right now, because what we feel now in terms of digital saturation might feel different when the rest of our life is normal, and it's only work that's digital. So I think we're all definitely still in that exploration place. But I think for us, the technology just gives us more options in terms of agility for work for our colleagues, and that being in the field, at home, and office feels effortless and all very possible. And our response so far has been about having more presence in neighbourhoods, and that's something that we see as an important part and likely to continue. I think that's me. Back to you, Martin.
Thank you very much for an absolutely fabulous presentation. A huge amount to think of, and I think, yeah, absolutely, it's a really interesting question. That kind of nowness and the immediacy of what we're kind of feeling now, and whether that kind of continues into the future. Thank you very much. Huge amounts to pick up on. Huge numbers of questions coming in as well. Do keep them coming in, and we'll make sure we get through as many as possible after the presentations. And I will move things swiftly on to make sure we do have that opportunity. So thank you very much, Anita. Great presentation there. And Mark, it's over to you. Welcome, and yeah, please take it away.
Great, thank you very much, Martin. So I'm Mark Bloomer. I work for Integra, and we're a company that implements software into the housing sector. The systems we implement are primarily ERP systems, the Unit 4 ERP system. So that's a back office system. It's finance, procurement, HR and payroll, rather than your frontline housing systems. But I think most of the lessons we're talking about today in terms of digital transformation and the effects of COVID are equally applicable across sectors. So I'm going to look at some of the ways that we in Integra have seen our customers impacted by COVID, and the way some of our prospective customers are impacted by COVID as well. One thing that I can perhaps share with you, which is quite interesting, is that we see a lot of requests for proposals in the sector. So we can sort of see exactly what all those people who are looking for new systems are treating as priorities in terms of systems at the moment. The systems that we work with, the systems we supply, are very much modern cloud-based systems, so they're very much supportive of a digital transformation agenda. So I think everybody probably watching this presentation is partway through some sort of digital transformation. It's something that everybody started on before COVID, and the aspects of digital transformation that everybody has been looking at and talking about to an extent already are listed out here. So that's remote and mobile working, which is a very obvious one. Self-service, artificial intelligence, adaptable and scalability technologies, systems integration, big data, and security and compliance. So I'm going to run through some of those areas in a little bit more detail. So remote working is probably the most obvious area impacted by COVID, and Kevin and Anita have already talked about it. Everybody's been forced through an extremely rapid change in terms of remote working, and I think lots of organisations have really surprised themselves in just how fast and capably they've managed to affect that change. We've seen remarkable transformations in many of our customers, and there's little doubt that this is one aspect of COVID which is going to be an irreversible change. I think I was looking at a McKinsey survey, which I'm going to mention later on. They've estimated an ongoing reduction of at least 30% in terms of office space and office time, and 20% in travel, which is across sector, not just housing, but I expect it to be similar levels for housing. So COVID has emphasised the value of cloud technologies, which many of you will have been sort of involved in looking at, the direction you're going already. Certainly we implemented a finance and procurement system for South Yorkshire Housing just before COVID, and I certainly remember speaking to the FD there, who said she really didn't know how they would have coped if they hadn't already moved to a cloud system. Remote and mobile working for the back office in finance means things like improving ordering, entering of expenses, entering of HR data, and obviously remote working. also covers mobile working, which is particularly important for frontline staff in the housing sector. It allows real-time data entry for frontline staff, which is a much less frustrating experience than having to enter data on later on, and it helps retain your staff. It gives flexibility, both remote and mobile working, give flexibility for staff, and I think that's quite an important factor. So self-service. Self-service clearly cuts interaction costs down from pounds to pennies, really, with most transactions. And I think, as Anita said, it really allows housing associations to focus on value-added time and putting time into value-added transactions rather than the more mundane aspects of transactions. Potentially improves the stakeholder experience. It's becoming more and more in line with stakeholder expectations, and that's clearly something that COVID has accelerated. Business to consumer applications, which I think both Kevin and Anita have referred to, have both come on quite a long way during COVID, and they've really boosted consumer and what in your case will be tenant expectations for what they can get from interactions with an organisation. And again, self-service is something that improves staff's utilisation. It allows staff to spend less time on some of the more mundane tasks, takes away a certain amount of duplication and rekeying, and allows more value to be added, something that staff, if it goes well, staff greatly appreciate. It allows them to provide more valuable services to the tenants that they're interacting with. So, an aspect of digital transformation which perhaps is a little bit further away than most, but it's certainly coming, is artificial intelligence. So in back office technology, we see things like invoice automation already being adopted. We see a lot greater interest in invoice automation, which is using artificial intelligence to read documents and enter the data without any sort of human interaction, taking away lots of manual work there. More advanced artificial intelligence technologies are also certainly underway. Things like chatbots that things similar to Alexa and Siri. We have our own chatbot called Wanda, digital assistant, and these can help automate processes as well. They can be used for things like procurement, as in the example on this slide, and they can be used for things like expense entry, saving a serious amount of time. And until fairly recently, these have probably been considered a little bit pie in the sky, but we are now seeing most requests for proposals that we get expecting, or at least as a nice to have, artificial intelligence capability. And we're also seeing some of our customers actually starting to adopt artificial intelligence, digital assistant type of technology now. Some of our customers are already using this for things like expense entry. Okay, the next couple of slides I've got here are taken from a McKinsey survey, which was produced about a year into the pandemic. It's across organisations, not just housing sector, but I think most of these lessons are certainly equally applicable in the housing sector. And you can see there the first line, increasing remote working. This shows how long organisations expected some of these transformations to take compared to how long they actually took. So pre-pandemic, organisations were looking at a timescale, something like 18 months to introduce remote working. And during the pandemic, they actually implemented these things in 2 or 3 weeks, a phenomenal sort of acceleration factor there. And there's a similar sort of level of acceleration in other areas, some of which I'll talk about a bit later, like increasing use of advanced technologies in decision making, and the change of customer needs and expectations and so on. So another slide from the McKinsey survey, which I think is important to mention. Kevin and Anita have already sort of hinted at it already, and that's the way COVID's accelerated and changed the view of digital transformation programs. Now, if you can see there, but at the bottom of this slide, in July 2017, roughly half of respondents were looking at digital transformations primarily as cost reduction programs. That percentage has now dropped to 10%, and now it's much more a case of looking at digital transformation as a key strategic element in being the best of your type of organisation that you can be, sort of keeping up with competitors, delivering your mission essentially to your stakeholders. That's certainly something that we've seen. Digital transformations in the request for proposals that we're seeing with existing customers is becoming a much more strategic focus rather than a cost-cutting exercise. Systems integration, this sort of ties into an extent with big data, which I'll talk about in a minute as well, but certainly what we're seeing from most of our housing association customers and prospective customers is a significant interest in replacing disparate legacy systems and all the inefficiencies that go with disparate legacy systems, with integrated systems, cloud systems, and also we're seeing most organisations very much interested in more sophisticated integration technology, using APIs, low-code, no-code integration, rather than old-style flat file technology with all the manual work, reconciliation errors, and so on that go with that. So systems being able to rely on a single shared truth in the data that they're using. And ultimately, this leads to a better tenant experience, particularly, for example, people in the finance sector talking to tenants may need to refer to 4 or 5 different systems to put together a resolution, an answer to a query on a financial matter, whereas a fully integrated system with a single shared of truth results in a much better, more accurate and faster response to tenants. So adaptable and scalable technology is something we're seeing a great focus on, again, in existing customers and in the request for tenders that we see. There's a significant amount of merger activity that we've seen going on in the housing sector in recent years, and two mergers that we've worked on sort of fairly extensively recently, Anchor Hanover and Sovereign Spectrum, and the adaptability and modernity of the systems we work with have greatly facilitated those mergers. So there's been increasing demand in the housing sector. There's obviously a greater regulatory burden, which really needs systems that can cope with those kind of changes. Things like IFRS 16, staircasing, shared ownership, all need a lot of adaptability in the back office systems. So big data, this is certainly an area which we're seeing much increased interest in the housing sector. We've recently been selected by Golden Lane to select a system for them, and financial planning and analysis capability was an important factor there. Systems can store ever increasing amounts of data. We can all see much more data being stored in systems. Both the systems that we have and external data sources that we can connect to, things like the Office for National Statistics deprivation indices by postcode, which can be incorporated into housing data. The key now is to take that huge amount of data and be able to analyse it and utilise it well to unlock insights into strategically how to further your organisation. So we're seeing organisations expecting not just to see a mass of data, but needing the tools to unlock the insights that data can provide. Things like financial planning analysis, modelling the effects of regulatory change, IFRS 16, etc. And COVID has just shown the need to respond quickly to emerging factors in the housing market. So lastly, the exciting topic of compliance. I think, I'm not sure it was Kevin or Anita already touched on that. Data security and cyber threats is something that we're seeing much more of. We've just been helping a charity that we work with recover from a cyber security attack that pretty much destroyed their system. So compliance with other areas like GDPR, the housing gap for the accountants in the audience, things like IFRS 16, and making tax digital are increasing areas that we see a greater emphasis on. With making tax digital, for example, we recently implemented some technology to allow accent homes a much smoother implementation of the Making Tax Digital programme. So In summary, this really largely echoes what Kevin and Anita have said. We see that COVID's much accelerated existing trends in terms of digital transformation. The McKinsey survey I referred to earlier suggests that on average there's been something like a 4-year acceleration of digital trends. There's possibly we've been seeing a little bit of a change of the ambition and vision here in digital programs as well. Digital transformation is challenging. There's a lot to do to make it work and get the kind of adoption you need in digital transformation. But COVID's shown us what can be achieved. Many of the housing associations we work with and ones including the presentation today have shown some extraordinary things that have been achieved in quite short timescales. So I think the ambition and vision of what can be done has been impacted by COVID. We're seeing increased digital interaction and stakeholder expectations in the housing sector. Sort of tenants' adoption of digital interactions perhaps been slower than other areas and slower than some of the housing associations we work with would like. But COVID, Uber Eats, pizza ordering, etc., is boosting tenants' customer expectations of what's possible there. And we're certainly seeing digital technology becoming more central and strategic. It's in competitive situations, it's becoming more of a core sort of differentiating between organisations rather than cost cutting. I mean, housing, it's certainly being seen as a central strategic mechanism for how you can deliver your vision to your customers, your tenants. And that's pretty much the end of my presentation, Martin.
Thank you very much, Mark. A huge amount to get to kind of process there and to get our teeth into as we move into the question and answers. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move swiftly on, but just a reminder to use that question and answer box. We've got loads of questions coming in, and I will try and get through as many as possible after the presentations. Thank you, Mark. Charlotte, welcome, and it's over to you. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, everyone. So I'm Charlotte Murray. I'm the Director of Care, Health and Wellbeing at South Yorkshire Housing Association. I'm also the Director that's responsible for our digital data and agile kind of journey. So just give a quick intro to South Yorkshire Housing. So we cover the Sheffield City region. We've got 6,000 properties and about 600 staff. And over 50% of what we do is kind of non-general housing, so extra care schemes, homeless shelters, work and wellbeing offer, social prescribing, stuff like that. So we're quite a varied organisation. So, moving. Here we are. So I just thought I'd start with a bit of a whistle-stop tour. So as someone referred to it the other day, back in the good old days, before COVID, where were we? Where were we as an organisation? So I think it's fair to say over the years we have, quite significantly underinvested in kind of digital and data. But I think we've spent the last kind of 2 years before COVID really trying to get our house in order. I wouldn't say that anything that we were doing was kind of innovative or cutting edge. We flew the odd drone over our house to assess roofs, but I think pretty much that's as far as our innovation went. That said, we had spent quite a lot of time and effort and energy doing the groundwork, the foundations, if you will. So in terms of our infrastructure, we'd really moved away from the reliance on head office, and the major thing that we've done is implemented an SD-WAN. In terms of systems, we'd started to move much towards a kind of cloud-based, or those that were hosted on our infrastructure. As Mark alluded to earlier, we'd thankfully managed to get Unit 4 successfully implemented before COVID. It's always great to be able to move money around and pay people. And we were very close to the implementation of CX and Keystone. We'd launched a new website and the first phase of our customer portal. And as an organisation, we'd rolled out the first phase of our agile devices, so about 400 devices that allowed people to work in an agile way out of the kind of 600 that were required. And the same for Microsoft Teams. So, hugely grateful for the team that implemented all of this. And what it meant is that we were in actually fairly good shape to then go into the pandemic. So in terms of when we actually got into the pandemic, I think once we got over the stress and the kind of grey hairs and extra wrinkles, I think what was really great was that actually the business could continue to function. We pretty much turned from, I'd say 90% of the time working in the office to being 100% at home within a kind of 48-hour period with very, very little interruption to business continuity. And what that actually meant is that we could continue to deliver against our kind of technology strategy. I think both Mark and Anita alluded to this, but in the past, if I'd have suggested that we roll out the implementation of Unit 4 HR and payroll remotely, I would have been absolutely categorically shut down and told that was impossible. We just couldn't do it. But actually, during the pandemic, we've continued to roll out devices and 365 to the phase 2 staff. Some interesting decisions. Actually, we had to at one point make a decision to purchase 50 laptops, German keyboards, because that was the only thing that was available, with the promise from the supplier that they would replace those as soon as the English counterparts became available. But we did that. We successfully implemented modules of Keystone. We implemented the remaining modules of Civica. Like I said, we rolled out Unit 4, HR and payroll. We've conducted a cybersecurity review and audit, very, very important, and I'll come to that later. We implemented Inform, which is the Salesforce charitable equivalent for our non-general housing side of the business. And also we've continued to roll out our customer portal. So, by no means kind of has it slowed us down. I just wanted to touch on some of the stuff that's already been covered, but this is some data from our kind of Teams channel take up. And I think what's just been phenomenal for me is the resilience that the staff have shown in terms of adapting to new ways of working. And yeah, part of that has been absolutely facilitated by the technology and the technology being there. But there's another element to this of just us building on what is a fantastic culture that we have within the organisation, and the spirit of staff really pivoting really quickly to that kind of fail fast mentality, that give it a go. It doesn't matter if it works. Let's just see what we can do. And I think in terms of lessons learned, there's something to take forward for all of us in that. I think sometimes we overthink things and kind of talk ourselves out of things and see the problems rather than the potential. So that's definitely something to keep in sight in our sites. Digital services for customers, completely agree with everything that Anita said around, as far as I'm concerned, we, as a sector, we're really behind in terms of what we offer customers. And this should just be part and parcel of our offer, and it should be constantly evolving and changing. But we did, during the pandemic, obviously really focus on kind of the digital inclusion capability of our audience group. And we actually mobilised a digital inclusion offer during the pandemic, powered by volunteers. And we applied for some money from Comic Relief, which we were granted for a kind of volunteer coordinator, but also to be able to buy and distribute devices and connectivity for customers, and that's been kind of hugely popular and successful. I think the thing really with that was, it wasn't necessarily about supporting customers to transact with us online. It was a significant realisation that actually by customers being digitally excluded, they were at a significant inequality, and that is there, a trusted person in their lives providing their housing or other support, that we had a responsibility to kind of help with that and help them overcome it. So we absolutely didn't do everything. So we've definitely got some outstanding requirements from our previous technology plan. I think the one thing that's quite frustrating for me is that we're never quite getting to the innovation. We're never quite getting to the emerging technologies. It does feel like, we're still very much in the foundations, getting the basics right. And we nearly, as an organisation, we really need to kind of lift our heads up and take a longer term view to make sure that we're not inadvertently missing out on potential opportunities longer term, or making decisions in the short term that are going to hurt us in the long term. So in terms of what's next, for us, blended working from a technology point of view is causing a real challenge. We have a lovely 4-floor open plan office in Sheffield that we developed just before the pandemic, and we're really keen to kind of get back to, once we're allowed, a blended way of working, whereby we have those people that are office-based spend approximately 50% of the time in the office and 50% of the time working remotely or in an agile way. But that's causing issues. The technology, things like 365, works beautifully when everyone's remote, but when you try and kind of do combos, it's a little bit more difficult. And also our beautiful building is all open plan, so the acoustics are an absolute nightmare. So a challenge for us. I mentioned kind of cybersecurity, so big priority for us. As someone who's not massively tech, the analogy I like to use is we've gone from having, in the last couple of years, a relatively modest house with probably one door and a couple of windows. We've whacked on a whopping great big extension and added like 5 doors and 20 windows. And we just need to make sure that we're, that our house is secure. And if people can get in, they can only access certain areas. So we just need to kind of fast track and bring up to speed our kind of cybersecurity strategy. System integration is a biggie. So Mark kind of talked about this. We've got a lot of data sat in different systems, as I like to call it, kind of little data islands, and we need that data to talk to each other. We need to be able to have compatible APIs, as Mark alluded to, one source of the truth, and also we want to start to be able to use that data. The analytics that Mark alluded to, that's kind of what, you don't collect data just for collecting it. You collect it to be able to use it and be a data-driven business, and that's absolutely where we want to go. So finally, I think, what have we learned? What has it changed? So I think for us, like I said, this kind of lifting our head up thing has become a really big theme. We're working at the moment on a kind of 5 to 10 year digital and data plan. It sounds a bit kind of scary and long term, but I think what we're trying to do is, get out of that, we'll just deal with the immediate next 12 months, 3 years. And even with like some of the ways that we've procured our systems, we haven't really lifted our head up and thought about our big data, about our data strategy, about what we're actually going to use that for, how our strategy of being a digital first organisation needs to be empowered and enabled long term. Like I said, we haven't got to the kind of the sexy stuff. How do we use technology to drive innovation in our homes and to help us with the green agenda? And we really need to kind of really need to break that. So in terms of kind of lessons learned, I think I wouldn't like to go through the process of stress testing your business continuity plan live ever again. I would highly recommend against doing that. I think cybersecurity's gone up the radar. If anyone's got an answer to the blended thing, please do let me know. And I think in terms of digital governance, that's also been something that we've learned a lot about, and but it's kind of here to stay for us. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you very much. Some great presentations there, huge amounts to talk about. We've got a huge number of questions that come in, so I'm going to move very, very swiftly on to working through some of those, and we'll probably run over by a few minutes just to try and get through some of those questions. Where should we start? Because there's a range of topics. But let's start on that skills issue. And Kevin, I'll bring you move back to you, because it's a while since we've heard from you, and it kind of picks up on an issue. I think you mentioned in your presentation. You were talking about new recruits. There's a question from Phil here. In my opinion, we will not get the right customer experience if colleagues aren't engaged. What have the panelists done to keep colleagues engaged so digital transformation has the highest chance of success? So, yeah, I guess, what's that kind of balance between new skills and making sure that you're engaging existing colleagues? I mean, the government's local digital declaration asks organisations to expect digital working from every member of their workforce. So how do you kind of make sure that happens and that it's appropriate? And perhaps a linked question in a way, I'm stretching it, but from Chris here, has the GDPR fear factor hindered engagement with residents during this period? And I guess that potentially comes to kind of skills and being comfortable with what you're doing as well. So yeah, Kevin, over to you.
Yeah, great questions. Yeah, I think the role in both technology and in cybersecurity, the role of both has changed an awful lot. So your average technology or security worker needs to engage with people in a far different way. It's not good enough anymore that it's techie, it's complicated, leave us to it. It's very much about engagement and influence and understanding, removal of jargon, making yourself understood. So I think the way that you try and extract value from technology and the way that you engage with people more broadly is very, very different. And that doesn't necessarily come naturally to people who might be decades-long IT professionals who've worked in a certain way and have certain stereotypes how they want to engage with other people. So I think that aspect requires skills and departments, and part of how you operate as a department that would deal with how you engage and have those touch points in the business, so that you can understand what the operations need from you, but also that the technology teams can influence back and offer suggestions about the art of the possible, about something that could be done that maybe operations haven't thought of. So it completely resets the relationship between how IT and operations in the business talk to each other. And then you get more extreme when you're dealing with directly with the customer and you're talking with residents and residents groups like I referred to earlier. So that's a new challenge for us, new challenge. And by new, I mean we've been really trying to grow these skills over the last few years. Same with security. What's more dangerous than leaving security as a techie-only task that other people think that the tools can deal with it all? You need a broad awareness around cybersecurity so everyone knows that they have a role to play in keeping the organisation safe. In that respect, it comes to the GDPR question and information governance and data governance more broadly, because that's what that question's about, in my opinion. It's about how do we make sure that data governance doesn't scare people. It's about understanding, about making sure that as many people as possible in the organisation have an understanding of how it all works and not allow the fear factor to be a barrier. Or if not sure, who is it I speak to? So at Sanctuary, we've got delegates all around, like champions all around the business who are our GDPR designated, understand both sides of the challenge. They understand the GDPR regulations and security more broadly, but they also understand the context of the operations that they work in, so they can support staff to get over the fear factor and understand what it is that needs to be done. Martin, I think it's a whole reset in terms of how technology and the businesses interact with each other, and a broader awareness, removal of the jargon, removal of the techiness about it, and make it a more engaging topic for people.
Thanks very much. Great answers, and I hope that was helpful with your questions. Thanks very much, and agreed on that last point. A couple of questions about how the technology and your strategy is impacting on other aspects of your business, perhaps, or certainly what you're delivering in terms of housing. So Anita, I might come to you with that question from Sue. As well as your technology strategy, has it impacted on your housing strategy in terms of building homes for working from, and it cuts out there, but I'm presuming it's working from home. There was another question which was about actually also from Sue. Are we building a house with digital infrastructure that allows older people to remain in their homes throughout their lifespan? So the types of homes we're building and how that's influenced by your kind of approach. So Anita, over to you.
Yeah, so in terms of how it's influenced our approach to housing, I think I touched on it a bit in terms of just having that infrastructure to be able to be more agile. And I think the point that I was making before around quite what the future looks like, or quite what post-pandemic looks like, given we're not past it, we should be fluid whilst we shape that, I think. So I think that is important. In terms of building homes that allow people to stay in there longer, and I saw one of the comments in the chat box about parts of Greater Manchester where customers just don't have any access to internet, or the coverage is really bad. I think as housing providers, that has to be part of our responsibility in terms of how do we help to support the infrastructure and enable our customers online. And I just wanted to pick up one of the other questions, Martin, that's in the chat box, that sort of speaks to the point around moving to digital only, or that recognition that Uber Eats and Amazon and the likes, they have transactional relationships. So for them to be exclusively digital or 90% digital, that works for them, but not for us. And I think that was the point that was making around us committing to multi-channel and recognizing that some of our customers will always want to engage with us in a different way, or the type of engagement will warrant that it will be different. And I was saying about how 48% of contacts now, service contacts in the UK, are started online. They're started online, but they're not completed online. So even people who are digital by default, so they opt to start the transaction digital. Sometimes it will be because of the service failure of the process, but other times it will be because we need more as consumers, or the engagement is complicated, or I need more information that you can't give me through a linear digital transaction. So I don't think that that's us. So the comparisons to Amazon and Uber and whoever are for that part of our service. So it's the digital offering and the standard of digital engagement that our customers are used to. We have to match that. That doesn't mean that we're only that, and it doesn't mean that we'll ever exclusively be that, because as I said, our relationship with our neighbourhoods and our relationship with our customers is not a one-off. It's decades usually.
Thank you very much. Really useful answers there, and thank you for picking up on a couple of questions, which means we get through. So, Mark, I hope that answered your question as well there. Thank you very much, Anita. And a couple of kind of quite practical questions here. For one from Chris: is a mobile app an expectation now for residents, or is having a mobile-enabled website sufficient? And perhaps a slightly broader one from Charlotte, and Mark, I'll probably come to you with these questions. How do you recommend gathering, improving resident data, including contact details, so we can fully engage digitally with those we want to? So a couple of questions there for you, Mark, if that's okay.
Sure, Kevin. So, well, in terms of the gathering data, I think that's kind of really a bit of a frontline sort of housing question. But generally, the data in the systems can now be gathered from lots of external third-party sources as well. I mean, part of the whole big data thing is being able to plug into sort of data from other organisations, although there's obviously GDPR sort of issues around that, but there is quite a lot of available information now that we can plug into systems. I mean, I think the key thing is once the data's in there, to get it in there right in the first point. And if you've got frontline staff with mobile devices, it's a lot easier for that to get in there right at the right time, right at the initial point of contact, and get that right. And then that feeds through to the other system. So I think it's important that data doesn't sort of degrade as it goes through the system. And I think that's, part of that integration is one way of making sure that the data gets into the system and stays in the system and flows through to other parts of the system without any sort of degradation. It's quite important. And so, sorry, Martin, what was the other question?
Well, I think you said that was the kind of frontline housing question, so that I think deals with that. There was just a question from Amy, which I'll come to, because I'm just going to try and bounce through as many questions as we possibly can. Hi, Amy. Your question was, as a service provider for housing associations, we're often asked to provide innovation. What do you interpret this as? And I guess that kind of gets to this. Do providers necessarily know what they want, and just be interested in kind of the types of conversations you have with people, and whether the sector's a kind of good customer, if you like. And this perhaps ties into some of the questions we've been or points we've been talking throughout this about knowing where we're going and what happens next, and planning for the future in a kind of a sensible way. So yeah, Mark, a quick response to that, if that's okay.
Well, I think the housing sector is actually quite innovative. I love working with the housing sector. I think it's a sector that's full of people that are very committed to what they're doing, to delivering services to tenants. And there's a lot of skill there in the IT side. We've seen, some of the things Kevin, Nita, Charlotte have already talked about, I think illustrate that housing associations really are sort of on this. And there's a great amount of IT capability in there. The sector's under huge pressures. It's got to handle a massive amount of change demographically and from a regulatory point of view. And I think I personally am very impressed with the housing associations as an industry and how committed the people are and the skills they've got in making these kind of things happen. And I think, all the other presenters, the kind of programs that they're talking about are really great for tenants. And I think in terms of innovation, for me, sort of from a back office point of view, particularly some of the big data stuff is really interesting. There is a lot of interesting data that you can gather, and I think that will become increasingly important to issues like tenant sustainability, identifying the value added sort of features that you can provide to tenants, identifying from NHS data, deprivation indices, and data about the tenants themselves, how you can focus on the tenants who really need support. I think it is one of the big features that I'm personally sort of excited about, and I think we'll be able to help housing associations offer a lot to their customers over the coming years. So it's a bit rambling, but I hope that answered the question.
No, it's really clear. Thanks very much. And I'm just going to bounce through another couple of questions very quickly and bring things to a close. But just because I'm aware we've got a huge amount of engagement and enthusiasm for the subject. So one from Audley, sorry if I've pronounced that incorrectly, but how do we ensure no one is left behind in light of where we are and heading with the subject matter, digital transformation in the housing sector? And Charlotte, I'll come to you with that one, because I certainly know, just in terms of the kind of the co-production, resident engagement work that's your organisation has been doing. So it's been doing some really interesting stuff there. And actually, very quickly, another question, but it'd be good to just get your thoughts on that as well. In Scotland, a question from Gary. In Scotland, we're looking at how organisations can benchmark the value and impact of the IT investments they make. Have you any insight about the things you've tried to measure the investments you make? So, Charlotte, a couple of questions for you to round things off, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine, thank you. I think with how you ensure no one's left behind, I mean, what we're doing at SVT is taking a kind of data-driven approach. So we're really using data to understand the segmentations of the customers in terms of digital capability, and really, targeting the digital inclusion training at the people that need it the most. But also, as kind of Anita alluded to, we've gone with a digital first strategy, but we've not gone with a digital by default strategy. So we are planning on keeping our phone lines on and services available, for those people that absolutely can't engage with them for a variety of reasons, and also to ensure that actually when customer interaction, so human interaction, compassion, kindness is required, that's the channel that we offer. I think secondly, you alluded to it, but we have what we call a kind of customer collaboration team internally who look at kind of designing with, not for. We're also really putting a large amount of emphasis on kind of service design as well. So actually, before we even get anywhere near the digital aspect, is looking at redesigning the service with customers. And then digitising that service, as opposed to trying to shoehorn an existing 20-stage process into a digital solution. So that's the kind of thing that we're doing, and we're looking at all the aspects of digital exclusion, from kind of accessibility to skill to sort of desire. So the different spectrum of things that stop people from wanting to engage. Sorry, what was the second question?
The second question was about how organisations can benchmark the value and impact of the IT investments they make. Any insight about how you've tried to measure the investments you've made? So that was a question from Gary, and then we'll round things off after that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're cutting edge on this by any means, but I suppose it just really making sure that you're keeping a really good audit trail of your business case for the implementation of the technology in the first place. So how much you're expecting it to cost. And then what it does cost. And then also being, at the beginning of that process, setting really clear kind of KPIs and outcome targets around what it is that you're trying to measure, and how much of that is kind of quantitative and how much of it is qualitative. So how much of it is about, pounds saved versus how much of it is around culture change, theory of change, a different way of working. So I suppose for me, there's loads of different evaluation frameworks that you could use, but it's kind of picking one and making sure that you're not being short-sighted just by measuring pounds and pence.
Thank you very much. Really clear answer, and I hope that was useful to you. I will bring things to a close. I know we've run over by 10 minutes. Sorry for doing that, but just the sheer number of questions we had coming in shows us a lot of people wanting to gain that insight and to hopefully take away some useful thoughts back to their own organisations. So I'll start with a thank you to everybody for tuning in today and for the questions you've asked. Really, really great questions. Thank you very much. Thank you to our panel for some great presentations and some great responses to those questions, and the insight you provided. Very much appreciated, and yeah, really enjoyed the session today. And thank you to Integra Associates and Unit 4 for sponsoring and for making today possible as well. So thank you all. Thank you for a great session, and yeah, it just remains for me to bring things to a close and see you all very soon, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you.